March 9th, 2008. Super Smash Bros. Brawl was just released for the Nintendo Wii in North America. The game was massively successful both commercially and critically, with many fans clamoring for the highly anticipated sequel to Melee. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Brawl though was the single-player adventure mode, Subspace Emissary. The mode would be a staple of the game, with an exciting storyline, and was a behemoth in terms of levels, bosses, and fighters. But much like many other games, some began to wonder how quickly they could beat the game in its entirety. This is the story of how a group of speedrunners took Subspace Emissary down to its absolute limit. For the purpose of this video, we're going to be examining the most popular category, Easy Mode, any percent. The speedrunning scene for Subspace was actually quite sparse during the first few years of the game's release. There was a decent amount of activity on forums like Speed Demos Archive, but much of the focus was in categories that had a timer visible on the screen, such as All-Star Mode, Boss Rush, and others. While activity in the Subspace category was relatively sedated, there were a few recordings of runs here and there. A runner by the name of Ultima MK2, or Ultima for short, would post a segmented speedrun of Subspace on easy mode in early 2011. He would record an in-game time of 2 hours and 13 minutes. Although Ultima's run is not present on the leaderboard due to it being segmented and recorded on a phone, their run represents an exciting foray into the potential for Subspace speedruns. The first recorded and complete speedrun of Subspace in any percent easy mode was done by French user Pinkyfish Gaming back in 2013. Pinkyfish finished the run with a respectable 2 hours, 43 minutes and 23 seconds, the earliest discovered non-emulator time. The speedrunning scene would slowly grow over the next couple of years, with a few runners here and there submitting their times to the leaderboard. It wasn't until 2016 though, that one of the first true pioneers of Subspace Emissary speedruns would emerge and make his mark on the category. Enter RubberDuckyAssassin. On March 9th, 2016, Ducky became the world record holder for any percent with a solid 2 hours 27 minutes and 38 seconds. Many at the time believed that due to the nature of the game, with a lot of levels being side-scrollers, there wasn't too much room for major skips. However, Ducky's run showed the potential for the game to be taken to soaring heights. What perhaps makes Subspace unique to other speedrunning games is that you're forced to go through the run whilst using nearly all members of the roster, rather than just one or two specific characters with the same moveset and abilities. While at the time of this run, the route wasn't entirely optimized, Ducky still managed to traverse each level in a somewhat swift fashion, albeit with a few small mistakes. After about an hour and a half of defeating enemies and saving characters that had turned into trophies, Ducky would find himself standing at the entrance to Subspace, where he would come face to face with the game's main antagonist, Taboo. Taboo would undo all of Ducky's hard work by once again turning these fighters into trophies and sending them into the abyss of Subspace, where we now find ourselves at the penultimate, yet longest stage of the game, the Great Maze. The Great Maze is a giant labyrinth which combines pretty much all the levels and boss fights of the game. There is no one clear exit in order to escape the maze. The player is forced to fight numerous dark clones of all the characters of the roster, whilst re-defeating all the bosses they previously encountered. Essentially, it's like you're forced to beat the game twice. During the run, we'd start to see a common trend in which Meta Knight, Brawl's most OP character, would be utilized much more regularly. After re-defeating the necessary number of characters and bosses, and getting slightly distracted by some friends in a Discord call.
I can't even see you go through half of those doors right now because the lies covering it.
Ducky would finally come face to face with Taboo, where he would make relative swift haste of the final boss and record a final time of 2 hours, 27 minutes and 38 seconds. Ducky's quick movement speed would cement himself as one of the top tier speedrunners in Subspace. However, his run had a lot of further room for optimization. In the following months, Ducky would take his PB and world record down further and further. By late 2017, RubberDuckyAssassin stood alone at the top with a 2:15.14, which was achieved live at Smash the Record 2017. A day prior, he had actually managed to get a 2:12 in game time, but unfortunately he wasn't able to record the run. Still, this 2:15 run at Smash the Record was over 12 minutes faster than his 2016 world record. There were certainly a few changes to the route here and there that made certain boss fights and movement options easier. For example, using Kirby's Inhale at the start of the very first fight, selecting Pokemon Trainer using Charizard against Taboo, and other neat optimized movement patterns and strategies would gain a significant time save. Another technique Ducky has started to utilize was something called Death Warping, where you would take Samus in Research Facility 2 near the elevator section and jump and slowly move to the right. By allowing Samus to SD near the bottom right of the stage, the game would spawn Ducky the floor below it, skipping past the fight as Pikachu. Additionally, some runners had also discovered that by quitting story mode during the Great Maze and re-entering, this would actually save a solid few seconds, as it would stop runners from backtracking constantly in the maze. With less unforced errors, alongside generally faster movement, Ducky was able to improve his world record further and further. However, what really started to set Ducky's runs from his previous world records weren't just optimized fights and better routing, but the introduction and discovery of a huge amount of fight skips. Around this time, the Subspace speedrunning scene had been attracting more eyes to the game. With the influx of new runners came an abundance of new skips and techniques that would revolutionize the route and lead to a major increase in potential time saves. Some began to notice that there was a certain trigger to fights starting on specific levels. These triggers are static and would lock the player into battle once activated. However, these triggers could not reach the upper blaster. Thus, theoretically, if one was able to get high enough, they could skip over the triggers and skip entire fights, saving crucial minutes. A Norwegian runner by the name of Desch had been quietly doing unrecorded runs of any percent, and had actually been getting times similar to, or even better than Ducky. Part of the reason was because he had helped find and discover some notable skips. Through scouring the internet and finding Japanese tool-assisted speedruns and segmented runs on intense difficulty, Desch discovered that some levels could almost be entirely skipped. In Battlefield Fortress, you could use Meta Knight's Glide to skip over 4 different fight triggers and save an entire minute on the run. A runner by the name of Techstrobe had also discovered a setup to skip over half of the side-scroller on Battlefield Fortress as well. Effectively, with these skips, it felt as if the entirety of the level had just been eradicated. These weren't the only skips in the game though. You could also use Meta Knight in Wilds 1 and the entrance to Subspace and skip an abundance of battles. In Research Facility 2, using Pikachu's upbeat in a very precise manner could allow the player to reach an unintended portal quicker than they usually could. Tech had helped compile all of the skips discovered by Desch into one video, and used his abilities to apply the necessary movement. Desch would also use Tech's forum post to offer some niche tricks for quicker movement options. The skips I just mentioned are just a few of the many that were discovered. Runners would work day and night to practice these skips, to which they could eventually execute them consistently. The contribution to any percent would allow the meta of the run to evolve in a new direction, and it was from here that many runners would attempt to take down Ducky from the top of the podium. Techstrobe, Tech08, and SWC19. With so many new runners and skips found, the world record had the potential to be lowered an insane amount. The runners I had just mentioned were all showing signs in their rounds that Ducky's reign at the top may not last forever. However, despite the influx and best efforts of those challenging him, nobody was quite able to catch up to Ducky yet. Ducky had still clawed onto his world record, still managing to lower his time. In early March, Ducky had managed to snag the first ever sub 210 with a 209.23, and he just kept on going.
Oh my god! Holy moly!
What happened?
Oh my god, 20607.
By early April, RubberDuckyAssassin had managed to lower the record even further to a staggering 20607. The implementation of previous skips, and just generally cleaner and quicker movement, allowed Ducky to continue to expand his lead over the rest. Techo, Tech, and SWC were certainly trying their best to keep up. Techo, just a few days prior to Ducky's 206, managed to become only the second person ever to get a 209 in game time. Each top contender would eventually end up with a sub 212 run by early June, an amazing accomplishment that would have landed them a world record just a couple months prior. But Ducky wasn't planning on relinquishing the top spot anytime soon. In early June, Ducky took his PB down to a 205.28, and that seemed to be the end of it. The gap between Ducky and the other runners had just become way too big. For every step each runner would take, Ducky would take 2 steps. By June, Techo had stopped doing attempts, Techstrobe would move on to other games. The only other viable contender left to challenge Ducky was SWC 19. The gap was seemingly insurmountable as Ducky piled on record after record. It's important to mention that during these attempts, many runners had started to switch from the North American version of the game to the European version. There were major time saves and skips that were only present on PAL and not possible on NTSC. However, this took a while for people to realize. The biggest skip on PAL was discovered by runner Dragolina, who found out that on Wilds 2, you could skip the entirety of the autoscroller by self-destructing on the side. While a previous Wilds 2 skip was known, this newest skip would offer a gigantic time save, nearly a minute and a half to be exact. Many North American runners initially didn't understand why the trick wouldn't work on NTSC, before quickly realizing that the skip was exclusive to PAL. But even with new skips being found, some runners had just simply stopped trying to snatch world record away from Ducky. He held onto that record with a claw grip, and it felt like he'd hold onto that grip for an eternity. However, SWC would continue to persist as the last challenger remaining. What we got over the next few weeks was a dogfight to snatch the world record from each other.
3, 2, 1, let's go!
On July 2nd, Ducky had managed to take the world record all the way down to 203.42. Despite a new time save in SWC's best attempt, Ducky was still steps ahead of his closest challenger. It seemed that Ducky's dominance was just never going to stop. However, just 2 days later, this happened.
Fucking go. Oh my god. Holy shit.
On July 4th, 2018, SWC finally did it. SWC had finally cracked the code and had managed to get a world record. His run consisted of an abundance of gold splits in the early game. While he unfortunately managed to lose a bit of time in sections like Lake Shore and Glacial Peak, his consistent play throughout the rest of the run was enough to minimize the time loss. Rounding off the run with a series of excellent fights in the Great Maze, and a very solid taboo fight, SWC was able to punch in a time of 2:03 flat. After nearly 2.5 years, Subspace Emissary Any% finally had a new world record holder. This isn't quite the end of our story though. Even with a world record to his name, SWC wasn't planning on stopping anytime soon, and neither was RubberDuckyAssassin. These competitors, alongside the hard work of those in the community who found major skips and further optimizations, had brought the run past numerous barriers once presumed insurmountable. It was only a few months prior to SWC's 203 that the world record stood at 215. The eyes of the community were now solely on SWC 19 and RubberDuckyAssassin. The question now was, who was going to be the first person ever to beat Subspace in under 2 hours? On July 23rd, 2018, RDA would snatch back his world record from SWC with a time of 2 hours, 2 minutes and 41 seconds. He wasn't done there though, as just 5 days later, Ducky would record a staggering 201.53 to mark the first ever sub 202, another time barrier broken. For a few months, the world record stood where it was. Both SWC and Ducky were determined to continue breaking more and more time barriers, but with the way he was playing, it seemed as if Ducky was the one most likely to reach 159. On January 29th, 2019, Ducky had managed to break another time barrier, recording a swift 2 hours and 40 seconds. Whilst this was an amazing record, Ducky knew he wasn't close to done. A missed Meta Knight glide skip in Battlefield Fortress 1, alongside some unlucky RNG during the fights in Great Maze, lost RDA a few crucial seconds compared to his previous PBs. Still though, the route was there, the skips were present. If Ducky could manage to slightly tighten parts of the execution, sub 2 was there for the taking. A new world record, and a world record being broken 3 days in a row by the same man. Yet still, Ducky was so agonizingly close to sub 2. Ducky's pace was stellar throughout the run, but unfortunately managed to lose time around the middle section. Ducky had managed to claw his way back, but he was still somewhat behind at the start of the maze. Still, Ducky persisted, and with some excellent RNG and execution in fights, Ducky stood before Taboo nearly a minute ahead of his PB, and on pace for the first ever 159. An extremely unfortunate death with Charizard and a barely missed up air from Mario wouldn't stop him from a new PB, but would still put him agonizingly close to sub 2. Nevertheless, he just wasn't quite there yet. But with Ducky being so close, everyone had their eyes peeled for the 2 hour barrier to be broken any day at that point.
He's gonna off waves here. It's over. 29.52 maze, 159.50.
Out of nowhere, SWC swooped in to become the first person ever to beat Subspace in under 2 hours. Part of what was so crazy about SWC taking the record was that just a few days prior, he had only managed to slightly improve his previous PB and get a 202.44. The start of the run was relatively solid at the beginning, with no missed skips, but after a few unforced errors in Research Facility 2, SWC needed to start doing some catch-up. By executing another skip in Bomb Factory 2, SWC would save nearly a minute and a half on his PB. Still though, to even come close to getting sub 2 from this point, something miraculous would need to happen. When it came to the Great Maze, SWC would play the best Brawl of his life by running through the maze in a record amount of time. SWC was the first person ever in a run to beat the Great Maze in under 30 minutes. A tense taboo fight to round off an unprecedented maze would cement himself in the history books and would land him that first ever sub 2-hour run. A day later though, after SWC broke the 2-hour barrier, Ducky would bounce right back up and try and get his world record back. Although it may not look like it since he was comparing his splits to his sum of best segments, RDA looked like a man possessed and was on an insane pace throughout the run, not missing a single step or skip in the process. His relative inconsistencies in the maze would again slightly hamper the run, but that didn't stop RDA from plowing through. Not one to let his record get taken from him lying down, Ducky would defeat Taboo swiftly and cement himself solidly in first position with a 1:59.27. After a flurry of stellar and nail-biting attempts, the dust was starting to settle. With what seemed impossible just a few months ago, there were now 2 competitors who could proudly claim that they were able to beat the game in under 2 hours. After finally breaking the 2-hour barrier, RDA and SWC would move in new directions and back away from running any percent. With both of the 2 top competitors stepping away, a power vacuum would ensue, and it would be an old challenger who would step up to the plate. Enter Techstrobe. During his absence from any percent, Tech had still been keeping up with the Subspace scene even whilst competing in other games. Tech had a PAL version of the game, and was still doing some New Game Plus races here and there. While RDA and SWC were competing for sub 2, Tech had actually recorded the first ever sub 30 Great Maze whilst doing individual level attempts. Still, it was tough for Tech to find the motivation to grind the game again, but one day, he was dragged back into Subspace after fellow runner in Prison Shadow had implored him to race. Tech managed to actually record a PB with a 2:08.31. Just 5 days later, Tech would break his PB down by nearly 6 minutes, getting a 2:02.42. Then and there, he knew that the Subspace itch was back, and that's when he started to truly grind. After recording a solid PB, Tech had actually started to work on individual levels rather than focusing on runs as a whole. What's particularly intriguing is that this approach was not seriously considered by previous runners, as no one else had dedicated as much time as Tech did to grinding individual levels. In August, Tech's work improving his ILs would help record a time of 2 hours and 27 seconds, landing in 3rd place. Tech was agonizingly close to a world record, but unfortunately some tough luck in the endgame killed the run. Still, Tech knew that if he kept applying his grind on ILs into a full run, anything was possible. Finally, after Ducky and SWC left a void at the top of the leaderboard, Tech would swoop in to become the 3rd person to ever beat the game in under 2 hours, and the 1st person ever to get a sub 1:59. After finally becoming a world record holder, Tech would slowly shift away from any percent, but would still work hard on grinding ILs in his spare time. Over the next few months, Tech would turn his attention to the New Game Plus and 100% categories, holding world record in all categories by the end of 2019. Yet still, with such dominance across the board, any percent was still calling back to him. The run was certainly improvable by the time he had gotten world record, but this time, that potential was extremely apparent, especially due to the community discovering a plethora of new strats and glitches. The first major skip was actually theorized by another runner by the name of Gary Too Scary in November of 2018. The player would select Snake instead of Meta Knight in the battleship Halberd interior. By using Snake's up B and inflicting C4s on themselves, the player can traverse out of bounds and reach a blocked off door. Desch, the runner responsible for a lot of the skips I had mentioned earlier, optimized the strategy a few months after Gary theorized it, and successfully performed it for the first time in a run soon after.
Oh,
Ooh, someone clip that.
This trick could save up to 20 seconds if done correctly, but if you died attempting it, you could lose almost 40 seconds of time. The brutal risk to reward ratio meant that it wasn't immediately implemented in routing. The second major glitch was the pause glitch. The pause glitch was originally discovered by Desch back in 2018, but only recently became a viable strategy. The glitch requires the player to press pause the very frame you enter a fight. This allows the player to move around in the fight with an unlocked camera while the enemies and initial blast zones are active. In Tech's forum post, he would outline the numerous different instances in which this trick could save time. Although Tech wouldn't implement this glitch into every possible scenario, the cases where it could actually save a decent chunk of time were certainly worth the effort. All of these new glitches and tricks, combined with further optimizations of movement during his IL grind, will push Tech even further beyond. In a matter of weeks, Tech had brought the world record down to a 1:55.36, shattering another time barrier in the process. On nearly every segment, Tech was performing extremely close to his best time. Sure, there were some minor time losses here and there, but this seemed to be as good as it could get. Tech was breaking record after record, pushing through barrier after barrier. Tech had stated in his run submission that he was effectively done with any percent, and again started to focus on ILs and the 100% category. But yet again, just like his previous hiatus, any percent still called back to him. His grind on ILs not only gave him the record on literally every single individual level, but it also translated to a much better chance at pushing through even more time barriers. The grind would once again continue. $154. At this point, Tech had a stranglehold on any percent, similar to Ducky's previous dominance a few years ago. Tech's extremely solid and rapid early mid-game put him on an incredible pace, even with the missed snake skip. A few mistakes during the latter stages of the run did cost him the chance to break 154, but nevertheless, Tech would manifest another world record. Tech knew that if he could tighten up a few things and fix his endgame, something big was amidst. Tech had taken the game to incredible heights. How much further could he go? "1 hour, 52 minutes, and 31 seconds. Tech would have his last dance on the stage by skipping 153 entirely and establishing a monstrous record. Tech would finally nail every skip throughout the run, including the incredibly difficult snake skip in the Halberd battleship interior. Tech's endgame was also incredibly tight and optimized, and with that, he could finally end off an insanely dominant chapter in any percent history. Tech's staggering 152 is where the world record stands today. While Tech himself has said he probably won't do runs in any percent anymore, he stated himself that 151 and perhaps even further time barriers were indeed possible given his pace during attempts. The potential for the run to grow is still boundless. While Tech has stopped doing runs, other runners have also cemented themselves as potential contenders. Just under a year ago, Dragolina, the one who had discovered the Wilds 2 PAL skip, became the 4th person ever to beat the game in under 2 hours. She currently sits in 2nd place. New runners by the name of MK Cocoon from Canada and Soran Tian from Japan have also made their marks near the top of the leaderboard. And it's not even just speedrunners who have made their mark on the category. A tasker by the name of Dylan Stedge Gaming recently released a task speedrun for any percent. He continues to find little tricks and skips to this day for the game. He's also currently working on another task for any percent. While the early pioneers of the game have slowly stepped away from the category, there's still the potential for someone, anyone, to become their next leader. What lies in the future for Subspace? Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thanks for watching.